Welcome to Feminine Founder, where we talk all things recruiting, hiring, business, and entrepreneurship. I'm Caroline Pennington, your host. Today I have Anessa Fike with me. Anessa is the queen of fractional human resources. She's been a chief people officer over 12 times now and is the founder and CEO of Fike & Co. over the past 10 years. So welcome, Anessa.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
So I'd love to hear your story. How did you get into human resources?
Oh, yes. So this is a fun story. Coming out of college, I actually have a journalism degree from Penn State, and which actually works really well in HR, but I'll tell you about that in a second. And so I was a newspaper reporter out of college. So I was a journalism major, went to be in the field in journalism. It was the time of journalism though, when, this is going to date myself, but when nothing was online yet and everyone was trying to figure out what do we put online, right? So do we put the whole story? Like, do we charge for it? We don't know what to do. And so it was that time of journalism. And it was such an interesting road because there were a ton of huge conglomerates buying family-owned newspapers. And I worked for a family-owned newspaper at the time in Eastern North Carolina. And I know it's like, Knight Ridder and McClatchy, they were all looking to just buy up a bunch of newspapers. And I remember thinking at that time, I don't want to work for a huge newspaper conglomerate. That's not what I want to do. And so I decided to step outside of journalism. I took like a small, kind of path to run a bridal salon. So I ran a bridal store. It was a friend of mine's, and I ran that for about a year. And then I got a call from a friend of mine about this place called the Motley Fool. And she said, we have a role open. I think you'd actually be great for it. So I said, okay. I started to look at the Motley Fool. I didn't know what it was. Amazing place. And I came back to her and I said, this place looks great. What's the catch? And she said, no, there is no catch. I promise you. So I remember interviewing with 12 people in, I think, 7 different rooms at the Motley Fool. Which was a tactic and talent that we can talk about at some point too. But there was a tactic behind that. But I actually interviewed for a role of executive assistant. So I started out at the Motley Fool as an executive assistant to the president, the CTO, the chief technology officer, and the chief people officer. And I supported their team, which was about, a little over, I think, 40, 50 people at that time. And, after about 6 months, the chief people officer and the president came to me and said, we're fighting over you. We have 2 jobs and we want you to choose. And I said, okay. And so one of them was, hey, go down the path of human resources. And one of them was, hey, stay down the sort of the business path of what's next for the Motley Fool on the president's team. And so I don't know, I thought about it for a few days and then I thought, well, I'm going to do the HR side. And I'm glad I did because that is where we are today. But I literally fell into it as most people do, right? So it is not something that I went to school for. It is something I fell into. But I learned that it is very similar. And I started, in recruiting, I sort of started doing a lot of HR projects and then went to recruiting and then became the global recruiting director at the Motley Fool. For all of our, our entire team around the world. And what I found was that especially when recruiting and talent acquisition, very similar things to journalism. So you're asking people questions, you're gauging their body language, you're trying to figure out if they're telling you the truth. Very similar. So I found that a lot of those skills really transferred well to human resources. And I have loved it ever since. And then there's a piece in there too that I had a really, really awful boss as my editor at the newspaper. And I think what I didn't realize at the time was that because of that awful boss, I wanted to make a difference in workplace culture so no one else had to feel that way. And so anyone who tells you that has ever worked in a newsroom of how bad those workplaces are, there's a lot of us from journalism that actually end up in HR because we want to change it and we don't want people to experience that. So that's my very long-winded way of how I got into HR. Basically, I fell into it.
I love that you have a journalism degree. I have a journalism degree. I have nothing to do with HR. And I came into recruiting as a candidate looking for a job. I was unemployed. And then here 15 years later, it just, you never know how the cookie's going to
works, right? Similar skill sets.
Yes. So you did a post recently about executive team members acting like HR people and talent professionals are afterthoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Snowball that, how it shows. So I'd love for you to talk further on why it's so important for companies to have a people first mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we hear this a lot, right? It is something that we hear all the time. And it's kind of like, it's the thing that if you don't have it, people are like, what is wrong? What's wrong with your organization? But there are actually very few companies that do it. There are a lot of people that say it, but not very many of them actually do it. But it's really important because when you're looking at all of the things that we do nowadays, unless you have a manufacturing company, a company that is agriculture, something that is requiring people to work with their hands physically in a space, if you have a knowledge-based company, and even in the manufacturing space, but really more so in the knowledge-based form, you really need to look at your people because your company isn't made up of huge machines and a ton of inventory. On the knowledge-based side, your assets, your inventory is your people. It's your people and their expertise and their intellectual property. It is absolutely inside the brains of your people. And I think as a lot of leaders tend to look across the executive leadership team, they almost think of people as like, well, we have them at the table, so that's enough. And it's not, because that chief people officer should actually be leading most conversations. It is the only department that touches everything other than your COO and your CEO. It absolutely should be up there in that same category. And it was funny. I met Laura Queen. She wrote an amazing book that I can get everyone the title of, but the book is about, in the accounting space, they were trying to figure out how to actually quantify assets, the human assets and the expertise assets, because humans tend to be on the liability side of accounting, and they're really not, right? Not right now. They haven't been that way in a long time. So her book is about how on the accounting side, they were trying to figure out how to make those assets to really explain and help support modern business practices. And she and I talked, we were on, Zoom, over the last year or so, talking a few times. And she said to me I think it was 1975 on the S&P 500, the companies on that list, 80% of their assets were in inventory and tangible goods. 20% were all the intangibles. Today on the S&P 500, that's flipped. And so 80% of a company's value comes from intangible assets, which includes human capital. It includes the assets of the human beings inside the organization and their knowledge and their expertise. So if you're thinking about this from a business standpoint of why should people be people first, it's because it drives 80% of your business's value. Why would they not be people first? It seems like it's a negligent business leader who is not looking and doing and actually day to day trying to thrive on the people first side.
So how can companies do a pulse check on their people and their culture?
I think listening is a skill that is underutilized. A lot of executives think they listen, but they don't actively listen. So I have a 9-year-old son, and I remember in daycare, often they used to say, "Do you have your listening ears on?" And most executives do not have their listening ears on. They act like they do. They're like these like little fake listening ears that they have on, and it looks like they're listening, but they're not actively listening. Because if they were listening, they wouldn't be asking people to return to office. They wouldn't be mandating it. They wouldn't be saying, your job is Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. They're not listening because that's not what employees are wanting. And so keeping a pulse check is actively listening to what people want. And then on the other side, doing something about it. I don't know how many organizations we have worked with. And when we come in, we change this immediately, but how many organizations we have worked with that they say, "Oh, I do a pulse survey every quarter and I do an employee engagement survey every 6 months." And it's like, okay, that's great. But what have you done after every single survey? Because what happens is when you start to ask people over and over again how they feel, and you do nothing about it, they're going to stop telling you how they really feel. Right. And it's the same in any relationship, in any human relationship. My husband often jokes with me that if I say, what do you want for dinner? And I say, I don't care. And then he says, well, what about this restaurant? Oh, no, I don't want that. What about this restaurant? No, I don't want that. What about this restaurant? No, I don't want that. And he's like, so why are you, why are you asking me? Right. It's that, but in a company format. So I think that actively listening and doing something about it and changing the pieces that they need to change to make their people happier are two very simple things. And it really comes back to really just how do human relationships work? And it's very simple things that can be done.
So, on top of listening and making adjustments and pivots, how can companies develop their human capital or their talent better?
Yes. Oh gosh, this is such a big one. I think we focus a lot, as you know, we focus a lot on the talent side, right? We're like, okay, we got to get people in, and we focus a lot on on filling those recs. But then it's like we forget that we have to focus on everyone's development internally. It's always one of the first things to be cut, right? And so we've seen that over the last year. Learning and development teams get cut. Training programs get cut. Then you see your talent teams get cut. Then you see your HR teams get cut. Realistically, those should be some of the last things to get cut. If you are not thinking about this time tomorrow, and you're thinking about this time next year, or this time 5 years from now, or this time 10 years from now, those should be the last three that you cut. And so it is really interesting to see how little time and effort companies actually give to developing their people and developing their talent and managing their talent. It is expensive. It's also very expensive, which we know on the talent side because we see all the dollars adding up every time they come back to us and we say, wait, did we just fill this role? Did we just fill this role 18 months ago? Yes. And it always seems to be, right? And you probably hear this on your side. It always seems to be, well, they didn't do this or they didn't do that. Well, that common saying when you're in an elevator and you feel like everyone in the elevator is an a-hole, actually you're probably the a-hole because if you keep saying the same thing. And so it's the same thing with talent. We keep saying when people leave, oh, it's them, it's them, it's them, it's them. No, it's not. It's the org. It's the org, and it's the lack of ability to spend quality time and quality money on developing your people. If you think about it, one of the reasons that we really don't have a ton of employee loyalty anymore are for a lot of reasons. But one of those is because companies forgot to hold up their end of the bargain. The employee-employer relationship and that contract between the two of them has drastically changed. And it had to drastically change because employers dropped that part of their end, right? They did not keep up with the training programs. They did not really keep up with what do you need and where do you want to go and how do we help you get there? A lot of companies forgot that and they said, no, that's on the employee to figure out how they get to the next step, to figure out what they want to do. And it's not. It's absolutely on the employer. If you think back to everyone talks about, in MBA and business school, right? What are the things that they talk about? They talk about GE in the training program, right? They talk about even today, like some of the best service in the hospitality industry is with the Four Seasons. Why is that? Because their training program is way better than the others. The companies that are still talked about as pillars in the business world are there because they treat their employees well and they take care of them and they develop them. They care about their development. The last thing I'll say about this is it's almost like when you're a parent raising a child. If you have a child that you kind of just like let themselves raise themselves, right? They're going to be strong and great and they could do it. But how much better is it to have a child that was nurtured and supported and you had an active participation in their development and you really helped them focus in on what they wanted to do, right? That is going to produce a much better, well-rounded human being who has the mental capacity and the support and the mechanisms in their brain because they don't feel like they're alone. It's very similar to employees and employers in that if you let employees kind of do it themselves, they can get pretty far. But how much better does that employee feel when they're supported and they're nurtured and it's a supportive environment to help them learn? So I think all of those pieces are ways that we can really look at development and do a lot better.
So your mission statement on LinkedIn reads, to create and foster inclusive, diverse, and engaging cultures that empower people to thrive and perform at their best. Mm-hmm. So what would you say is your, I guess, top 3 things that can help steer companies in that direction?
Oh, yes. Well, there's a lot. Companies often come to us and ask us what to do off the bat. And I often say there isn't a template for this. And anyone in what we do comes into companies and helps fix something, right? It's a change, it's a transition, it's a transformation. There's not a template. And anyone who comes in and says there is they don't know how to do their job. Every organization is different because it is full of different people at different times. And this is something that I have said for a decade plus. Culture is a living, breathing organism. So it changes from second to second, from minute to minute, from day to day, from year to year. It changes all the time. It ebbs and flows. It flexes. It's sad. It's happy. Culture is changing all the time because everyone in it is changing all the time. You don't have 50 human beings that have the exact same, brain capacity and emotion throughout the entire day, let alone an entire year. So your culture changes all the time. So what I think I often see is companies want that one thing. And what I often tell them is, it's not one thing. And I don't know what things to put in place yet until I learn more about you. And then once we get in there and we kind of understand what is the culture, what is the dynamic at play, what's the change, transition, transformation moment we're helping them through. What are you trying to be? What do you want to get at? Who do you want to be? And what do you want to be known for? All of those pieces play a part in what we bring to them. But what I would say the one commonality of it is, and this ties back to why a chief people officer needs to be really, up there with the CEO, COO, but people tie into every single thing. It is an ecosystem. And if you do not understand how feedback and performance and learning and development and payroll and compensation and benefits and rewards and employee engagement and employee relations, if you don't understand how all of those feed into each other and create a balanced ecosystem, you will never have a great place to work. You cannot just go in and fix one thing. And it is trying to find that thing, right, that is the most pressing, that does need the most help, and prioritizing that, but making sure that you also have the full context of what else is happening in the organization. And so I think that a lot of leaders look towards the chief people officer to fix their culture. It is not on their shoulders to fix. It is everyone's responsibility to not only have a part in that culture to make it better, but also on the DEI side, it is not just your chief diversity officer's efforts. It's not just your chief people officer's efforts. It is literally everyone's effort. And I love when organizations are like, what's your DEI, what's your initiative for us? And I'm like, initiative. This is layered into every piece of your organization. It should be layered into every decision you make. This isn't a piece, right? It is every day. It is every minute. It is a thought process and a mindset. It is not a piece. And so I think that from that perspective, it's just having leaders understand how much relies on people and how much people rely on other things and how they all play into each other. And that understanding is what we often have to get leaders toward in that first couple of weeks that we're working with them.
So I understand you have a book coming out in February.
Yes,
Can you
yes.
More about that?
Yes, absolutely. So, as you can guess, I have had a lot of experience with leaders and companies. I think we're almost to that 120th company that we've worked with around the world, and we've seen a lot. We've worked with series pre-seed all through D, pre and post IPO, VC, PE, bootstrapped, private, public, nonprofit. We've seen almost all of it. in any industry except for oil and gas. Like that's basically it. We've worked across every other industry. And there's a time, by the way, the book is called The Revolution of Work. And it's time now that we need to really look at the way we all work. Why was it set up this way? What is this, all of the things that we don't like to do and we don't like about work and it's not working for us? Where does that stem from? And how can we change it? Right. And so that is what the revolution of work is about. It is about now is the time that we can change it. We do not need to be working the same way we worked in the 50s, which, by the way, we are. It's still Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. How are we this far into the modern world and we're still working since, like it's the 50s? So it's really about that. And it's about some experiences that I have had with companies sprinkled in. And it's about what can we do in the future to make this better? Because I'm a millennial and my generation, we really don't love all the things with work. And we sprinkle in questions and pushbacks here and there. But Gen Z is really not having it. So unless we figure this out, there will be no people to hire soon because they will all have opted out of what we all work, a company that we all want to work for, all the companies that we would work with. And so it's now or never. It really is time for a revolution of work. Or else we're going to see a lot of companies go bankrupt because they really just they won't have anyone to hire.
It'll be telling the next 10 years because the older generations will phase out of the workplace and then Gen Z, that 30% number will rise to, 50, 75 in the next 10 years. And then past then it'll be 100%. But
yes. And I know Gen Alpha behind them, my son's in Gen Alpha. I know that they are very much, in that Gen Z category, if not even more so on that, towards that way. So I can't imagine what they're going to, be okay with because it's not going to be what we're okay with.
So, it's going to be a 180 from what today's workplace looks like.
Yes, exactly.
So as we wrap up, how can our listeners find you?
So you can find me on LinkedIn. I love to put a lot of hot takes on HR and talent. And realistically, it is honestly just, I call it like I see it. And I don't hold much back. That's not my personality type. And I'm very authentic about what I see. People often ask me where my content comes from on LinkedIn. And I say, it's because it happens to me. So I am living it if I post about it. And so find me on LinkedIn. And you can find me at our website as well, fikeandco.com. It's FIKEANDCO.com. And then in February, grab a copy of my book. It'll be available, all the wonderful places that books are available.
Thanks, Anessa.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for having me.